My dad spent my whole life saying my mom cheated and abandoned me, but on my 30th birthday, I got a letter. I am your mother. I never left you. The truth was darker than anything he told me. The hallway outside my apartment was colder than inside, the kind of cold that settles in older buildings when the heating cuts off at night. I remember how the light flickered above the mailboxes. One long hum, then a brief dimming, like it was thinking about going out. I had bent down to pick up a small padded envelope that didn't belong to anyone else on the floor. My name was handwritten, the letters tight together, like someone had practiced them first. No return address. As I held it, I felt the weight shift inside. Not heavy, but dense, like paper folded too many times. A group of teenagers passed on the street below, their laughter carrying up through the stairwell window. For some reason, the sound made the envelope feel even more out of place, like it had traveled farther than the 2 steps I carried it across. I turned it over once, twice. My thumb brushed the seam. The glue felt old, like it had been sealed days ago, maybe longer. When I opened the lobby door to head back upstairs, the hinges let out a long groan. The air smelled faintly of someone's dinner, onions, maybe garlic, and the radiator pipes clicked in the walls like something settling or waking up. On the way up, the envelope stayed tucked under my arm. I kept my hand near it, not gripping it, just aware of it. Everything else, the keys in my pocket, the phone vibrating once with a birthday message, the echo of my steps, blurred behind the steady presence of the envelope. At my door, I paused before unlocking it. The peephole distorted the hallway behind me, making the flickering light stretch in the reflection. I slid the key in slowly. I still don't know why I hesitated. Maybe it was the handwriting. Maybe it was turning 30. Or maybe it was the faint smell of something like perfume that rose when I tore the envelope open. A warm, powdery scent I didn't recognize. Inside was a single letter on cream-colored paper, folded with a crease so sharp it caught the light. On top of it, a photo slipped out. Me as a baby, maybe 6 months old, in a woman's arms. She had her cheek pressed to my head, her eyes half closed. It didn't look posed. It didn't look stolen. It looked familiar in a way I couldn't place. The envelope rustled in my hand, and at the bottom I noticed a clipped stack of documents. Police reports, a custody order, pages with black and white letterhead. My name appeared in them again and again, and on the letter, in careful handwriting, I am your mother. I never left you. I kept staring at those words while the photo on the table curled upward at one corner, as if trying to move or breathe. I sat down on the floor instead of the couch. The carpet felt slightly damp near the edge where my shoes had tracked in melted snow earlier that morning. The radiator clicked behind me, a steady rhythm that made the silence between each sound heavier. I unfolded the letter carefully, trying not to smudge the ink. It was written in blue pen, the strokes narrow and even. She wrote her name, Laura Finch. A name my father had said once, maybe twice, always with a tightness in his jaw, like biting down on something sour. My mother, he'd always said, cheated and left when I was too young to remember. He rarely spoke about it. When he did, it was always the same. She walked out. She didn't want to be here. I did what I had to. I used to ask questions when I was a kid. I stopped around 12. The letter said she had spent years trying to find me, that she wasn't allowed to see me, that the story I'd been told wasn't the truth. She wrote dates, places, names of officers, even the badge number of one who had taken the report when she'd tried to file for visitation. She apologized for sending everything all at once, but said she didn't know any other way. That on my 30th birthday, she wanted me to have the truth before more time passed. My hand stayed flat on the carpet as I read. I could feel the fibers imprinting lines into my palms. In the stack of documents, one page caught my eye, an incident report dated the year I turned 3. It had my father's name listed under person involved, and hers under complainant. The brief description said she'd attempted to pick me up from daycare for a scheduled visit, but the staff had been informed she no longer had legal rights. The note at the bottom read, "Mother visibly distressed, escorted from premises, advised to contact family court." I flipped through the rest, one paper at a time, each one making a soft, rasping sound against the next. There were stamped dates, signatures, a custody motion dismissed, a request for a welfare check declined, even a photo of her holding me in a hospital room just after I was born, the ID bracelet on her wrist still visible. None of it matched the version of my childhood I had carried with me like a foundational truth. The air in the apartment felt heavier. The refrigerator clicked on in the kitchen, and the hum filled the space between the questions that were starting to form. Why now? What was missing? And the one that sat deeper than the others. What else had he lied about? I laid the documents out in a careful line. The apartment windows reflected them faintly. Pages of my life I never knew existed. I didn't call anyone that night. I made a small pile on the coffee table of everything she had sent, aligning the corners, almost like preparing evidence. I think that helped me focus on the physical things. The paper, the ink, rather than the unraveling feeling that crept up my spine. The next morning, before work, I took the envelope with me. The cold outside felt sharp enough to sting, and as I locked my door, my fingers stiffened around the metal. The street was quiet, early enough that the usual sounds, traffic, deliveries, hadn't begun. Even my footsteps felt too loud. I ducked into a cafe near the train station and sat at a corner table. The wooden chair creaked when I leaned forward. I spread the papers out again. The custodian wiping down the front counter gave me a quick glance, but I didn't look back. The first thing that stood out now that I wasn't in my apartment was a date, March 1998. A petition for joint custody filed by her. Another date, June 1998. Motion denied due to incomplete service and failure to appear by respondent. But the signature for the person notified, my father, looked nothing like his handwriting. I had seen his signature on school forms, job applications, the lease of our old rental house. This one seemed too round, like someone trying to imitate a style they'd seen once but not mastered. I took a photo of the page with my phone. The screen brightness reflected off the glossy sections of the document. For the first time, a thought formed clearly. This wasn't just a lie told by omission or resentment. Something had been actively rewritten. At work, I couldn't focus. The office printer jammed twice, and each time the sound of the rollers grinding against the paper startled me more than it should have. My supervisor asked a simple question about a client file, and I realized I had no idea what she'd been saying for the last minute. I answered quietly and went back to my desk. During lunch, I stepped outside and stood near the loading dock, where the concrete was cracked and smelled faintly of oil. I called the number written at the end of the letter. It rang twice before going to voicemail. Her voice was soft, lower than I expected. "This is Laura. If you got my letter, thank you for reading it." Then a pause. "Please leave a message if you can." I hung up without saying anything. That evening, I went through old boxes in my closet, photo albums, school papers, things from my childhood my father had kept. The air smelled like cardboard and dust. The corners of some photos were stuck together. I was looking for something I couldn't name, any sign that she had been there, but every picture seemed curated. Just me and him at birthday cakes, in parks, at the beach. Even ones from before I turned 2 showed only him holding me, him feeding me, him sitting beside me. I found a hospital photo, but the person holding me wasn't her. The woman had a surgical mask on. Her eyes were crinkled in a way that could have been a smile or just the mask pulling. I flipped it over. No writing, no date. It felt too neat, too complete. I noticed then that the adhesive on the album pages had yellowed unevenly, some spots darker, like they'd once held different photos. The thought pressed against my chest. What had been removed? The next day, I called the county records office. The receptionist transferred me twice before someone in family court archives picked up. I asked whether a custody petition from 1998, involving 2 specific names, would be on file. The clerk typed for a long time. I could hear papers shifting, a stapler being used somewhere behind her. Finally, she said, "There's a record of a case opened in March that year, but it's marked as sealed. I can only confirm it exists." I asked who requested the sealing. She paused, then lowered her voice very slightly. "Typically, it's done by a party involved. Sometimes for privacy, sometimes for disputes." I asked if the records could be unsealed. "You'd need both parties or a court order," she said. I thanked her and hung up. That night, I called the number again. This time, she answered on the first ring. Her breath caught slightly before she said hello, as if she recognized the number and was bracing herself. When I said my name, she didn't speak for a few seconds. I could hear something in the background. A kettle boiling, maybe water bubbling. Finally, she said, "I wasn't sure if you'd call." Her voice sounded careful, like someone stepping into a room they'd filled with memories. I asked if we could meet. She offered a cafe 2 bus rides away from my apartment. "It's quiet," she said. "People mind their own business." The next morning, I arrived a few minutes early. The bell above the door jingled softly. There were only 3 tables occupied. The smell of brewed coffee filled the small space, mixing with the faint scent of pastries behind the glass counter. She walked in wearing a dark green coat, her hands tucked in the sleeves. When she saw me, her shoulders lifted just slightly. Recognition mixed with something else, maybe caution. Up close, she looked older than the photos, but her eyes were the same shape I'd seen in the mirror all my life. We sat across from each other. She kept her hands folded on the table, the nails clean, the knuckles slightly tense. The metal edge of the table felt cold when my fingers brushed it. She didn't rush into explanations. Instead, she asked if I was okay. I nodded. The cafe's refrigerator hummed in the corner, the low vibrations settling against the table legs. She told me the story slowly, checking my expression every few sentences as if making sure the ground between us stayed steady. She said she had never left willingly, that she and my father had fought often near the end, not about me, but about money, trust, and something else she didn't specify at first. She said one night she woke up, and I was gone from my crib. My father told her she was unstable, that she wasn't fit to raise a child, that he'd filed emergency custody. She said she went to the police, but they treated it as a domestic dispute, not an abduction. They told me to go through family court, she said. By the time I did, everything had already been arranged. I listened without interrupting. The steam from her cup blurred the air briefly between us. She said she had tried for years. Letters returned unopened, visitation motions denied. Then she said something I hadn't expected at all. There were things he was involved in, things I didn't know about until after. When she looked down, I saw her thumb trace a small circular motion on the side of her cup, a habit that seemed old. What things? I asked. She hesitated, then lifted her purse onto her lap. From it, she took out a folded piece of paper. She slid it across the table. It was a printout of a news article from 2001. The headline mentioned an investigation into fraudulent insurance claims and falsified documents submitted by a group that included my father and 2 others. The charges had been dropped due to insufficient evidence and witness non-cooperation. He didn't want anyone looking into his life, she said. Not the courts, not me. I stared at the article. My reflection warped on the glossy print. We sat in silence for a moment. The cafe door opened briefly and a gust of cold air swept in, making the napkin on our table flutter. I asked her why she waited until now to contact me. She said she had spent years afraid that reaching out would cause more harm than good. But when she found an old address record with my name attached, through a public database, she realized she had no more excuses. I thought maybe, at 30, you'd want the truth, or at least the chance to have it. Her voice didn't shake, but her fingers tightened slightly on the lip of her cup. I walked her to the bus stop afterward. She touched my arm once when we said goodbye, light enough that I barely felt it. But the imprint stayed. Over the next week, I met with her twice more. Each time, the conversations filled in details I hadn't known I was missing: the name of the street where we lived when I was a baby, the toy rabbit I apparently carried everywhere, the pediatrician who had seen me for my first checkups. These were the kinds of memories no one fabricates. They were too mundane to invent. I started noticing gaps in the stories my father had told me over the years. Little inconsistencies. Places we supposedly lived that he couldn't describe well. People he claimed were friends from work whom I never met. Nights he said she never showed up, that now had documented attempts of hers to see me. By the 3rd conversation with her, something settled in. The version of my life I'd carried for decades was built on the absence of her. But she hadn't been absent. She'd been pushed out. The next step felt inevitable. I called a lawyer. His office was downtown, on the 10th floor of a building that smelled like printer ink and carpet glue. The legal assistant placed the documents in a stack, tapping the edges to align them. She said the custody case might be too old to reopen, but a petition to unseal the court file could be filed. I signed the retainer agreement. My signature looked uneven on the page. After the meeting, I walked home instead of taking the train. The winter sun was low and the wind cut through my coat. I kept one hand in my pocket, fingers curled around my keys. A week later, the lawyer called. He said that based on preliminary findings, there were irregularities, documents filed without proper service, affidavits with mismatched signatures, and an expedited hearing that should never have been granted. Your father may have used channels he shouldn't have, he said, possibly with assistance. When I asked what that meant, he sighed. Someone helped him bypass procedure, someone inside the system. The wire of tension that had been tightening inside me seemed to coil further. That night, I called my father. The phone rang twice before he answered. His voice was groggy, like I'd woken him. I told him I'd received a letter. There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing, steady but heavier than usual. What letter? He said, though it wasn't a question. I told him everything. The documents, the photos, the meetings, the lawyer. He didn't interrupt until I mentioned her name. He inhaled sharply. Then he said, "She doesn't get to come back after 30 years. She never left," I said quietly. A long silence stretched between us. I could hear a TV faintly in the background on his end, voices muffled by distance. He finally said, "You don't understand what she was like, then explain." But he didn't. Instead, he ended the call. 2 days later, I received a voicemail from him. His voice sounded different, lower, wearier. He said he didn't want to discuss the past, that everything he'd done to protect me. But he didn't specify from what or whom. He didn't deny anything. I saved the voicemail and forwarded it to my lawyer. Then I printed a transcript. I kept the paper flat on the desk until it dried to a pale gray. 3 weeks passed. The petition to unseal the file was submitted. The clerk stamped it with a blue ink pad, the date clearly visible. My lawyer attached the evidence, documents from her, inconsistencies in the court record, the voicemail. He said it might take months. In the meantime, I contacted the police department listed on the old reports. A records officer sent me a copy of the original complaint she'd filed. It was heavily redacted, but the essential details matched her story. Each step brought the truth closer, piece by piece, like pulling up tiles and finding a different foundation beneath them. The breaking point came on a Thursday morning. I was at my kitchen table when I received an email from my lawyer with a scanned page from a recently retrieved file. It was an affidavit supposedly signed by my mother in 1999, agreeing to terminate parental rights. The signature wasn't hers. It wasn't even close. The comparison was stark. One smooth and curved, the other jagged and rushed. It was like seeing two entirely different people pretending to be one. I forwarded the document to her. When she called, her voice was steady, but I could hear under it the long shadow of 27 years. "I never signed anything like that," she said. I didn't doubt it. The truth wasn't just darker than I imagined. It was older, embedded, the kind of truth that had been maintained through silence, paperwork, and a system that had failed one person so thoroughly it altered the course of another's life. The next weekend, I visited her apartment for the first time. It was small but clean, with framed pictures of landscapes on the wall, mountains, oceans, places that looked far from any courts or custody hearings. She had a box waiting for me on the coffee table. Inside were letters she'd written over the years but never sent. Some addressed to my father, some to me. The paper had yellowed at the edges, but the ink remained crisp. I read them one by one. Some were short, updates about her life. Others were long, recounting memories she feared she was losing. On one envelope, dated 2005, she had written simply, "For when he's old enough." I closed the box carefully. We sat on her couch for a while without speaking. The window beside us reflected the room, two people sitting close but not touching, connected by a history that had been split in two. When I left, she walked me to the door. Her hand hovered near my arm, not quite touching this time. I felt the distance, but it no longer felt empty. The court eventually granted a partial unsealing. Not everything. Some portions were too old, too contested, but enough. Enough to see the timeline. Enough to confirm that multiple documents had been filed without proper verification. Enough to show that the emergency custody order had been obtained using claims later found unsupported. It wasn't the dramatic closure people expect. No courtroom confrontation. No confession. Just pages, signatures, timestamps, order where there had been chaos, facts where there had been stories. My father and I haven't spoken since the voicemail. I sent him a letter, not angry, not accusatory, just factual. I included copies of the documents. I asked him to tell me the truth, whatever version he could still offer. The letter hasn't been answered. Maybe it never will be. Life stabilized slowly, the way seasons shift. I found a rhythm again. Work, groceries, quiet evenings. Sometimes the radiator still clicks at night, the same rhythm as the night I opened the envelope, but now it feels like a reminder rather than a warning. I keep everything. The documents, the letters, the photos, organized in a single binder on my shelf. The spine is labeled with the case number assigned to the petition. When I close it, the latch makes a soft snap. Sometimes on weekends, I meet her for coffee. We don't talk about the past every time. Sometimes we talk about where she hikes on Sundays. Sometimes she asks about my job. Small things, routine things, proof that new memories can be made at any age. One morning, after walking her to the bus stop again, I watched her board and find a seat near the window. She lifted her hand slightly. I lifted mine back. The bus pulled away, leaving a faint trail of warm air on the cold pavement. When I returned home, I locked the door behind me with a deliberate turn of the key. The apartment was quiet, morning light spreading across the floorboards. I stood there a moment, breathing slowly, feeling the steadiness of the room. Some truths take decades to surface. Some losses are measured not in years, but in stories withheld. But sometimes healing is just the sound of your own footsteps, steady again, moving forward on a floor that finally feels like your own.